think we're going. Brian's the one who usually pushes record, so we're going it without him. One of the rare Brianless episodes. So I have with me today on Crosstabs, which is the podcast you are listening to. I have Dave Honeycutt and Samantha Bear from the Oregon Property Owners Association. Now, I want to start out because I don't know. I think it should be obvious from the name, but I was on your website and I went on who you are and I clicked our founders, but I didn't even really need to do that because really I think the founders of your organization are the founding fathers of the United States of America because they are the ones that really kind of pioneered private property rights. They're like, the king doesn't own this. We own this. Individuals own their land. And I think that's basically what you guys are about, right? You're about property owners' rights.
Yeah, absolutely, Reagan. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and Article 1, Section 18 of the Oregon Constitution guarantee the right of private citizens to own property and not have that property confiscated by the government. And so that's essentially one of the fundamental tenets of this country. And property rights, if you look around the world, property rights, the right to own your own land and try and make a living off of your land, is what separates successful countries from those that aren't. And so it's a no-brainer. It's a fundamental part of this country, and we're happy to represent property owners. We've been doing it for almost 40 years now.
And what are some simple ways that people understand about how you guys engage in advocating for property owners? Are you doing it in a policy making space? Are you doing it with individual property owners?
Yes, the the answer to that is yes. Sam and I work in three different ways primarily. One, we work at the legislature, and you've seen anyone who spent any time at the legislature has seen both of us, and we have a lobby team that works on behalf of property owners, all property owners. We don't highlight a segment of the property owning public. We represent them all, homeowners to ranchers to developers to realtors. It doesn't matter to us. And so we've been advocating at the legislature for for me, it's been 30 years starting next year. And we also work in the courtroom. Sam and I are both lawyers, and so we'll do our work both administratively with the various agencies. Land use in Oregon is really an administrative area of the law, and so we work a lot with the agencies. We work a lot with the appellate courts. We work a lot with LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. And then we also do a lot of work through educational efforts. We try and educate property owners so that they know what their rights are, so that they know what they can and can't do with their property. And a lot of times, the reaction we get from a property owner that'll call us is, "I had no idea it was like that."
Hmm.
Well, in this state, it's really hard. The state makes it really hard for people to use their land.
Yeah, I think if you were, especially I think people that move here from other states is probably, I mean, I think homegrown Oregonians too, if you're not, if you haven't owned property before, you're a first time home buyer or you're, somebody who has bought a little bit of land and wants to do stuff with it, you find out, pretty quickly that there's a lot of limits on those kinds of things. And Sam, I kind of wanted to ask you this question. What is in your view, the biggest threat to property owners' rights right now? Is it local government? Is it state government? Is it other property owners? Like, what's the biggest threat?
The answer to that is also yes. It's a combination of it all. We have layers and layers of regulation, and at times I say it's kind of like that Spider-Man meme where it's the three Spider-Mans all pointing at each other. That's kind of what it's like between the state government, the local government, and then, NIMBY opposition groups. And on any given issue, they
Hmm.
could all three be pointing at each other, and the property owners in the middle going, wait, I just want to build a house.
Yeah.
And so most people, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. People from out of state have no idea what that's like because it's really not the same in other places, but people in Oregon don't really
Hmm.
know what that's like. And it's not until, they go to pull a permit to go do something because they need to, have an ADU to have family member live on site to take care of their aging parents, or they want to open a business or they want to go do something where all of a sudden they're hit with, the answer is usually no, or the answer might be yes, but they have to spend, how many thousands of dollars in legal fees or consulting fees or rounds of appeal to where they just get frustrated and they give up. So, Dave gave a great example at the opening of, this idea of private property rights is really rooted in like the foundation of our Constitution, our government. But ultimately, we fight for opportunity. We fight for freedom. We fight for the ability for people to provide for themselves and their families. And the best way to do that is on your own property. And there's just way too many road barriers in place for folks to be able to do that.
And I would say if you haven't already, go to OregonPropertyOwners.org, which is your guys' website, and scroll down and look at Oregon Land Use 101, which is Dave's talk on just kind of the basics of land use. And I was listening to that before we started, and it's really good. It's about an hour, and you'll learn a ton from it. And I'll link it in the podcast show notes because I think everybody needs to listen to it because I think you find out very quickly that we are not super normal actually. Like this is a pretty abnormal. Like if you're going to go out there, the thing that always annoyed me so much is every time a journalist writes about Oregon's kicker law, it's like they've discovered it for the first time ever. It's like Oregon's unique kicker law, and I was like, "What are you talking about? It's been in existence my entire life." You could write the same thing about Oregon's land use laws. They're very unique. Now, in the kicker sense, because all the journalists are funded by the government, generally they mean it bad when they say unique. And I think in a lot of ways, you could look at Oregon's land use law and also say it is unique bad. Um, I think that so check that out. Check out the Land Use 101 video. We're not going to do all that stuff, although I think we could do 10 podcasts on that stuff because there's so much good stuff, and we'll have you back for other things that come up. But I think the first kind of big topic that I want to go into today of the two that you guys had mentioned to us that are kind of hot right now is wildfire and property rights or lack thereof related to wildfire. So the big picture is more than half of Oregon's land is not owned by Oregon. It's owned by the federal government. It's managed by the federal government. It's rangeland and it's forest land. And a lot of times fires will either start on that land or start on land near it and then just burn. And the lack of management there causes that to burn, which can cause these really bad mega fires. Um, Oregon gets reimbursed for fighting some of that, but the reimbursement takes a really long time. And so there's this big discussion about, well, what can we change about our land use laws to make it so that people are able to better protect themselves, and then where do we get funding for that issue, right? Now, I don't know if you guys are engaged as much on the funding piece, but you're definitely engaged on the land use piece. And there was a big bill. I just saw the picture of Kate Brown signing it. It's on the forestry website still about 762 and how big of a deal that was a big bill in is it 2021? And I think you guys worked on that. So tell me about was 762 something you liked or didn't like and why?
Well, remember, Reagan, in the 2021 legislative session, that was the COVID session where the Capitol wasn't open, so everything was done virtually. But remember that was coming off the heels of the 2020 Labor Day wildfires.
Hmm.
And so when you have a significant wildfire event like we did on Labor Day of 2020, you knew full well going into it that the legislature was going to act. I like to say we had 90 90 wildfire experts all said in the legislature. And so we knew that there was going to be a bill that addressed wildfire. And, from our perspective back then, there was a need to do something to address wildfire. It's an issue. It's an ongoing issue. We see it around the Western United States. It's mainly a Western U.S. and Canada issue, but it's on the fire. The number and size of wildfires is getting exponentially worse. And so we understood that the legislature wanted to deal with that issue, and we agreed with that something needed to be done. The problem with 762 was that there were a couple of particular ideas that the legislature wanted to pass that we believed were essentially land use laws masquerading as wildfire policy. That essentially what the legislature was going to try and do, or at least the majority party at the legislature was going to try and do, was to stop people from rebuilding their homes after they burned down in wildfire prone areas. And obviously for us, that's an absolute non-starter. There are ways to encourage people to protect their homes that we're very supportive of and their property. But at the same time, if the whole purpose of this wildfire bill is essentially an end around to stop people from living in rural areas, we're going to fight tooth and nail to try and defeat that. So by the end of the session, Senate Bill 762 did a lot of good things, but because there was the essentially the threat that they were going to use that as a backdoor way to tell people, and you're all going to move into town, we opposed it. Sam and I opposed that bill. We were the last two lobbyists opposing that bill until the last day of the session.
I want to just add, though, two things, and we can talk about this in more detail. One, Senate Bill 762 was an omnibus bill, so it
Yes.
had multiple different concepts in it. The issue that we were fundamentally opposed to and concerned about was the map, the state wildfire hazard map, and
Hmm.
using that map as a regulatory tool. And we can, again, get into that in a little bit more detail. But I just want to flag our concerns back in 2021 about this being used to prevent people from living in rural areas. That wasn't, some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. That was a real fear that played out just last session. This session, there was a bill, Senate Bill 79, that was introduced in as a committee bill in the Senate, that would have prevented people from building homes or rebuilding homes in areas designated as high wildfire hazard. So there's a strong contingency of people that think that the best way to mitigate against risk is for there to be no risk at all, and that no one should be living there. That's not a tenable position for our state. That would depopulate huge areas of our state, have massive economic impacts for our rural communities, and just doesn't make any sense, especially because we have extremely strong building code standards, and defensible space standards. We have other and safety measures put in place to allow people to live, and mitigate risk and not swing such an extreme way. But I just want to flag that because I hear a lot of, you know, stuff out there about how that was just so, ridiculous conspiracy theory, and it wasn't. It was true, and there's a bill to show for it.
Yeah, and I think one super important that you flagged that because now you can credibly say, regardless of what any of the potential, groups that were putting that forward or sponsors that put that forward will say, there's now evidence of legislation that was put forward that somebody believed this and believed it enough to turn it into a committee bill, which isn't something that you can just do, right? Not I can't just submit that online in a form and then it appears in a bill. Like there are people have to okay that and let it go forward. The other thing too is that I think like you look at the fires in Talent, which is just south of Medford, right? Those were I know somebody who lost their house down there. That was a neighborhood that burned down. That was a suburban neighborhood that burned down. So the wildfire threat isn't just to somebody's cabin, 25 miles outside town. It's any city surrounded by trees, which is like a lot. So there, and any town, I mean, all rural land is just everything that isn't urban. And so if the threat is the rural land, eventually you're going to run out of rural land to burn up, and it will come burn up the urban land as well. So the risk is to everybody. The smoke affects everybody. There isn't some sort of magic lines. I mean, you talk about this with like, you can't see the redistricting lines. Well, the wildfire can't see the map lines of the low risk and the high. It'll just burn stuff until it runs out of fuel. And so that's a huge point there. To get so talk about the wildfire maps because I think that really exploded. And you were just telling me about an article, which I will need to go read about that the repeal of the maps. They're trying to. That was a big victory. Let's start with that. Senate Bill 83, which I think you guys helped write or maybe did write, basically. Thank you for that because that bill did several things, I think, but the main thing was repeal those maps that were part of 762. So we're now basically 4 years later. They did two versions of the maps. They had to pull back the first map after massive negative response. And again, had to introduce Senate Bill 83 to just fully repeal it because the second set of maps, which almost didn't change at all, actually, in totality, were also very, very bad. So Senate Bill 83 in this session repealed that, right? Am I getting those facts generally right? And maybe you can color and add in there.
Yeah, no, that's right. The maps, our primary concern with Senate Bill 762, as Sam said, were the maps. And because, with the maps, it's one thing for the state to draw maps and designate areas as different levels of risk to wildfire.
Right.
Uh, what Senate Bill 762 did is not only did they map those areas and assign properties a risk classification, but on top of that, it imposed a series of regulations that property owners within those areas were subjected to. And it was that regulatory component to that really scared us. And essentially the notion that, and this is a misconception, I think, with the public thinks, at least some of the public think that folks that live in rural areas are typically well off. That's the place to go where you have some money and you want to buy a home on acreage and raise your family.
Hmm.
It's actually the inverse. The poorest parts of Oregon typically are your areas outside of town, the rural areas where people go out and live because that's the cheapest place that they can find to live. So the potential regulatory impact of these maps was huge for folks that elderly people and people of limited means that just wouldn't be able to comply with the new regulations that were going to be imposed. What made it especially troubling was that it's really hard when you essentially draw a map, based on aerial photographs and limited studies that's going to be precise enough to start regulating properties on a property by property basis. So what happened when the maps came out is exactly what Sam and I told him was going to happen. You had a house that was classified as extreme risk right next door to a house that was classified as low risk. And if you went out and stood on the property, and looked at the two houses, you couldn't detect any difference between the two. You'd have extreme risk classifications on farm fields that had water rights with pivots.
Yep.
And so, the public was never going to buy into those maps because when you actually went out on the ground and looked at the properties and looked at the mapping designations that were imposed, it made no sense. And on top of that, There was nothing that the property owner could do once their land was mapped, no matter how they took care of their property. There was nothing they could ever do to change those designations on their map. So the public was never going to buy into this. We told them the public was never going to buy into this. And if the public's not going to buy into to the maps, then they're not going to buy into any of the program. And there's a lot of good components in 762 and our wildfire program. It did a lot of good things and still does a lot of good things. But until we got rid of those maps, the public buy-in was never going to be there.
And the map didn't really improve. So it's important for folks to know there was two rounds. There was the first rollout that went absolutely terrible. I mean, it just went terrible, and there's a series of factors as to why it went terrible. One is that at the time that the map and the letters about the map started coming out was also coincided with property owners being informed about changes to their insurance.
Yeah.
So a lot of people believed that the state wildfire map was causing,
Mm-hmm.
their insurance premiums to go up or to lose insurance. The reality is that that's not correct. The insurance companies have their own maps, have been doing their own mapping and their own risk modeling. It's very similar, but they're basing it off of their own risk modeling. It wasn't what the state was doing, and we know that to be true. But it didn't matter because ultimately, at the end of the day, who cares which map caused people to lose insurance? People are losing insurance in droves. People are getting priced out of insurance in droves, which affects financing, their mortgages, their ability for their businesses to operate. So people were really upset about that, rightfully so. And then, as Dave said, there was just a ton of inaccuracies in the map. We had an example of a duplex where one side of the duplex had a different risk classification than the other side of the duplex. And then they went and tried to redo the map. They did a bunch of, rightfully so, they changed some things. They factored in irrigation. They did some rounds of public feedback and public comment. They tried to re-release the map, but it still was riddled with inaccuracies. I had an example of four properties, all four lots, all next to each other, all owned by the same person. And it was like piano keys. One house was high, one was moderate, one house was high, one was moderate. And he had four kids. And I said, okay, well, pick your two most responsible kids and give them the one with the high risk lots because they're going to have to do these regulatory requirements and
Yeah.
the other two won't. And he looked at me like, you're joking, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, no, I'm not joking. That is exactly how this is going to play out. Because if your property was designated as high, you then had to do defensible space requirements and you had to do home hardening requirements
Yep.
that other people did not.
Well, and I think that's super interesting too, because the bill sort of contradicted itself in that way, where the map said it doesn't matter if your property is irrigated or not, we're going to classify it based on some factors you can't control. And then they're also going to turn around and tell you, but if you do these things on your property, you will reduce your wildfire risk. And it's like, well, which one is it? Because it can't be both of those things. Which was it one agency or a group of agencies that was responsible for the map? Now, my guess is if we checked in with all of them, none of them are going to claim any responsibility today. But like, whose job was it to come out with the map? Do you remember?
Well, the map was actually done by OSU and under an agreement with the Oregon Department of Forestry.
Okay.
Uh, we don't have a beef with ODF, and we really don't have a beef with the way Oregon State drew the maps. The problem was the bill itself limited what the university could do as far
I
as
see.
the map. And so basically, the deal was done the minute the bill passed. Those maps were never going to be right. We
Yeah.
knew the maps were never going to be right. We told them the maps were never going to be right, and we told them, and you know, the problem with this, Reagan, is if you look on the maps, and any of your listeners who've seen the wildfire maps will tell you this, you're getting into Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, and Central Oregon. You're not the maps are not an issue in the Willamette Valley.
Right.
And so the areas of the state where the maps are going to play a significant role and have a significant regulatory impact are the areas where you have people that tend to be more conservative and are less trustful of government regulation, reasonably so. So you know, it just set the whole thing set it up for rejection. It was bad from the start, and it needed to be. They should have never moved forward with those maps ever.
Well,
And
and
it's
if you
really,
look at the way the legislature's laid out too, I mean, because it's a population assignment, you have the predominant number of legislators from the regions that are least impacted, Portland, and followed by Salem. I think Eugene is somewhat impacted, or at least the parts that surround Eugene, but I think they're the second most populous after if you just take the whole Portland metro as one section, then Eugene is second. And so the places with the largest voting influence is also least impacted by the maps. Of course, the irony is that some of the folks that were the key drivers of passing the maps were not from those areas. In fact, they were from the most impacted wildfire communities. But you know, moving on from that part. So Senate Bill 83. What's the current status for landowners? Is it significantly improved? Are there still some mandates that people need to pay attention to? And then what's kind of next on wildfire?
And what happened, the governor signed Senate Bill 83 a couple of weeks ago. So the maps are officially repealed. All of the final orders that the state issued, you know, the state sent scary letters to every property owner that had a high risk or high hazard classification on their property, and gave them the right to appeal. There were over 4,000 appeals filed. Those have all gone away because the map's no longer there. And with the repeal of the map came the repeal of the regulatory impacts. So the state will no longer be have the authority to regulate home hardening or to regulate defensible space. Those issues now have been turned over to local government. So county by county, city by city, your local government, if they choose to, can impose defensible space requirements. They can impose home hardening requirements you know, if you're going to remodel your home and remodel the exterior of your home and you're in a high risk area, the local government could require you to use different materials to essentially make it harder for your home to catch on fire. And Sam and I have watched demonstrations where they've taken hardened structures and put them right next to non-hardened structures. You wouldn't believe it until you saw it, the difference
Hmm.
in the fire risk to a non-hardened structure as opposed to a hardened structure. But the point is, all of this will be done if it's be done at the local level with citizen input, and each community can decide what's best for themselves.
yeah, I just want to add on the demonstration. It is, I mean, I fully believe in home hardening, and I think it's what our, you know, our residential structural code, the R327 code, is one of the best in the country. It is a cost barrier though, and that is something that as this conversation evolves, you know, we have to keep in mind because not everyone can afford to put in the metal fence. Not
Mhm.
everyone can afford to do everything that, of course, in a perfect world, we would all want to do. And that is something that I just take issue with in the original bill of that mandate of saying, well, you have to. Well, okay, what if someone can't? What if they literally cannot afford it? Then what are they doing? Their house is a nuisance. They can't rebuild it. They can't go put it back. And what resources are you offering to them? And so this is kind of the next clean slate almost, or like a different opportunity to approach this problem with actual incentives, actual financial support,
Hmm.
letting communities, individual communities lead the way on this instead of this very heavy-handed top-down approach that, sure, if this was all done in a lab and everything existed in a perfect world outside of actual, finances, we could tell everyone to do that, but that's just not reality.
Well, and I think
We
also there's
do
a
a
part
really
of this. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Reagan, we do a really good job at top-down approaches here in the state of Oregon, which never seem to work very well, but with our agencies keep at it, and so does our legislature.
Well, and the legislature is, if you just ask them, they're filled with good intentions. I'm not so sure about the agencies. We'll get to that in a minute. But there is this sort of one, you make a great point. I think a lot this you talked about, Dave, the idea that the rural life is for rich people, which I think is that's a relatively in terms of people actually doing that, one, very anecdotal, and two, very recent phenomenon. It had been the truth for a long time that the more affluent people went to the cities and the suburbs and that rural and is still true if you actually look at the data, but there are certainly there's at least one group out there that wants to create the perception that rural people are, massively wealthy and want to build something called McMansions, and I'm not, again, not really sure what that is. We're of course referring to the folks at Thousand Friends of Oregon, who are sort of the primary proponent and muscle behind uh, preserving Senate Bill 100 and really the current iteration of that land use system, which I don't even think necessarily resembles what the original folks who wanted land use to look like even does. But they've built quite a scheme on top of that that really prioritizes actually just keeping rural land devalued is really what they prioritize, because if you can't do anything with it, it isn't valuable. And so they want to prioritize that under the guise of these nice, protecting farms. Um, Now they care a lot about the land. They care a lot less about the people on the land trying to make the living. And I think that's sort of the big differentiator. But I like to call them the disciples of Tom McCall because they have almost a religious adherence to stuff that doesn't make sense. Uh, but they seem very proud of it. And I think one of the places where, and we'll kind of transition into as our final topic here, where that really becomes obvious that there's two groups of people and they do not speak the same language at all. It's the Thousand Friends and the DLCDs, which is the Department of Land Conservation Development, which was sort of formed to enforce Senate Bill 100, if you will, and help local governments enforce it too. And this farm stand rulemaking. So my kind of understanding of this, there was a bill that my boss introduced that I probably hit send on the email to get it introduced and written was I think it's House Bill 3133. I'm doing that off the top of my head this last session, and the idea was is that the kind of regulatory and statutory structure on operating farm stands is pretty old. It's pretty old law, and you can tell us more about that, but that we could modernize it and make it more effective for folks. There's a lot of gray space people are operating in, and giving people and businesses, which is what these farms really are a lot of times, is businesses, legal certainty helps them make decisions to grow. They're very popular in their communities, very important parts of their communities, and so we wanted to try to help them out. But there's sometimes in the legislature you come to this place where people are afraid of hard conversations and solving hard problems, which I'm sure is shocking to people that politicians are struggle to solve hard problems sometimes or don't want to. And that's kind of seems what happened here. And so, you guys that come in and give us a quick update, hey, we think this is going to go to rulemaking and there could be some good done there. And that was all I heard about it. And then we went on with the rest of our session working on other stuff. And then I just start, DLCD, it sounds like, went and drafted up some rules. And you can tell me about how much input they took, but man, the rules that came out were a lot different than what we were envisioning with the bill in terms of providing people certainty, and freedom and opportunity to kind of do a lot of the things they're already doing, things that are already popular, things that people in all parts of Oregon love. So catch us up on that. Where are we at with DLCD's farm stand rulemaking, if people haven't heard?
Well, those rules are currently on pause and for good reason. But before we get there, I think we should start at the beginning of
Yeah, go
kind of
ahead.
how this came up and why farm stands all of a sudden went viral, which was not on my 2025 land use bingo card. I will tell you that. But it's important for folks to understand, just like at the highest level, why do people even have to get permits to have a farm stand? If farmers want to sell farm crops, why can't they just do so? And it does go back to Senate Bill 100 and Senate Bill 101 and the many Senate bills and regulations that came after that. But really, it comes down to what is called exclusive farm use, or EFU zoning. So the legislature created the exclusive farm use, or EFU zoning designation, essentially to try to preserve and protect agricultural land from non-farm urbanization. And that's a good at the highest level. That's good. We should protect farmland. We should make sure that we have enough of it to feed people. Way too far, and in their quest to protect and preserve farmland, they impose some of the strictest regulations on farm property that actually prevents farmers from doing what they need to do to farm and stay in business. So EFU land has some of the highest restrictions out of any other zoning designation in the state. And it's also really important for the public to understand that EFU land is not a small minority of land. It's not this tiny little area of our highest and best quality soils like people make it out to be. That's not true at all. And Dave can probably fill in with the actual statistics on it. But what folks just need to know at the highest level is a majority of privately owned land in the state is zoned for exclusively for farm use or for forest use. And that is land that actually, in some places, has the lowest quality soils, has never been farmed, has no water rights on it, and you could farm rocks on it, but that's about it. Some of that land is zoned for exclusive farm use. And a farm stand, before I keep going, do you want to add anything on that?
Oh, just that 97%. Once you get a town, 97 out of about every 100 acres of privately owned land, so nearly all of it, is going to be zoned as either farmland or forest land, regardless of whether or not it's capable of being farmed or whether you can grow commercial timber on it. It's the state just blanket zoned, and they really didn't. It's not planning at all. They had two color crayons, a dark green color crayon and a light green color crayon. The light green color crayon was farm and the dark green was forest. And they figured this was done in the mid 70s. And they figured that they would go in and have a more detailed conversation later. They never went back and had the detailed conversation. So everything outside of town is the land that Sam's talking about. And, when you get into parts of the state, where you get outside of town, it's rocks. You have entire towns that are built on rock, and so you know the our friends would have you believe that when a farmer wants to do something on farmland that's not traditional farming, they're essentially converting the farmland into something else. That's not true at all. And a lot of that land that the farmer actually wants to do something on is the portion of the farm that's not very good for farming. So they want to make an alternative use on it, like, I don't know, having a farm stand so that they could sell their product directly to to area customers.
And
And
so what
that-
we've learned really is that the state of Oregon struggles with two things. It struggles with maps and it struggles with computers really hard, and have, it seems like, for many years, it turns out.
And I would say having laws and regulations that are rooted in common sense, but we can get to that in a
Yeah,
second.
yeah, that's right.
Um,
What is
but
it? So I want to give, because I like to I think we probably have some listeners that maybe don't share our values. So let's talk about what's the best case version of why you might try. What's like the good, let's say the good faith argument for requiring a permit or some limits on the farm stands, right? Is there are there any good arguments, I guess? Would you
Yeah, I think there are. And it's important for folks to understand really what is a farm stand permit? What are
yeah.
people doing out there when they are given a permit to have a farm stand? Two things are really important to understand. If you are just selling your farm crops, if you just have your own farm crops that you grow and you want to sell it, that's considered farm use under state law, which is outright allowed in the farm zone. You don't have to go get a permit to go do that. But if you want to, the farm stand statute and the farm stand permit allows you to do a couple things. One, it allows you to sell other people's products and processed farm products. So your locally made jams, chutneys, things like that, all those delicious goodies made out of Oregon farm products that are a processed value added good, you can sell from a farm stand. And you can do that within anything that's made and grown in the local agricultural area, which is pretty broadly defined as the whole state. And then the certain counties on our neighbor. That's for a reason because our agricultural economy does not exist in a tiny 10-mile, vacuum. Farmers are working with each other. They're maybe growing fruit in Hood River, packing it in Washington, bringing it back. It's a cross-state industry and trade. So our local agricultural area is it's much bigger than just, the nearby farms surrounding someone's property.
Because not all
It then
crops
also allows
work well together. That's one. You can't always farm one thing right next to another thing, so they have to be done in different regions. But I think that also brings up a broader point is like most people don't farm everything. And so it seems like the ability to sell all farm products produced somewhere in Oregon should almost be a even lower standard just because most farmers don't farm everything. And so like that there shouldn't be a lot of additional scrutiny on that anyway, because it's like if it was farmed in Oregon, why shouldn't we allow it to be sold here?
correct, 100%. Um, and that's totally true. Oregon is a specialty crop state, so we're not like Iowa. We don't grow the big five. We grow really different and unique things here. Folks might not know this. We have one of the only legitimate wasabi farms
No
in the
way.
country in Oregon. Yeah, Curry County. We grow really cool things, really delicious things. That's why we have such a strong restaurant industry here because we have access to all of the greatest stuff that everyone wants to eat here in Oregon, which makes sense of why we also have awesome farm stands and agritourism activities that people can go buy, locally grown produce and value added products, just not at your standard grocery store. And that's really what a farm stand is. It's a direct to consumer sales opportunity that allows farmers to not only support themselves, but support their nearby farmer. The grocery market, the traditional wholesale grocery market is really difficult because farmers are competing on a global market. So if you have a higher overhead cost or you do different ag practices that don't allow you to sell your product for 13 cents a piece, you have to come in higher. Why would the grocery store buy your product?
Hmm.
They're going to buy the cheaper product, right? So a farm stand allows farmers actually not only to sell their own product, but allows them to help their neighbors out and other farmers in the area that might not be able to get those wholesale contracts. And actually, it's extremely beneficial for Oregon, our agricultural economy as a whole. But that's the basic level of a farm
Yeah.
stand. The farm stand statute also allows you to sell retail incidental items. So merchandise. If I have a farm and I have a hat and I want to put my logo on it, I can sell the hat out of my farm stand. Or if I have an awesome cutting board in the shape of Oregon that I've hand painted, I can sell that out of my farm stand. It also allows you to do fee-based promotional activities. And this is the really key part is that
Hmm.
most people are doing agritourism events like farm to table dinners, pumpkin patches, hay rides, all of those fun harvest festival type activities are primarily being done through farm stand permits as fee-based promotional activities. There's limitations on that in statute with the income. The income from that can't exceed more than 25% of the total sales of the farm stand. And that goes back to your question of like,
Hmm.
what is the good part? What's maybe the best argument of requiring people to have permits and requiring people to have to go through some sort of process? If you're going to have events, you're probably going to have traffic. You're probably going to have parking issues. You're going to be bringing a ton of people out into the farm zone. So requiring them to get a permit and having to go through some sort of process allows there to be some sort of county oversight over that, of making sure that we're managing public health and safety, that we're not causing traffic impacts, that we have adequate on-site parking. I don't necessarily, there's also another argument that I don't agree with, that I don't think is a good argument, but it's that some people think that allowing, if we don't have a ton of restrictions on farm stands, then all of a sudden we're going to have a McDonald's out in the middle of farmland masquerading as a farm stand, or a carnival, or we're going to have Six Flags out there with roller coasters, just getting a farm stand permit. I don't think that's real. I think that that's a really speculative and kind of silly argument. But that is,
Hmm.
what some people believe as to why we have to have so many restrictions of what people are allowed to do, because they don't want to have Six Flags.
No, they don't want a McMansion and a McDonald's right next to each other. I mean, it's obvious. I mean,
I would love a McMansion and McDonald's, so I just don't share that opinion.
there you go.
I live in the country, Reagan. I'd like to have a McDonald's next to me.
Yeah,
The problem is McDonald's ain't going to come out to my neighborhood
not
because there's
enough
not enough
traffic.
customers.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that's a super interesting viewpoint, and trying to get in and understand the viewpoint. I mean, you can sort of understand their broad arguments, but when you get into the weeds on the actual policy arguments, it's the kind of thing we had this during when we were doing the whole semiconductor thing, when we thought there was an opportunity for Intel to expand significantly. There was this land out, and I can't even remember where it's out. It's out past Hillsboro, in a little region that I'm forgetting. But that land sits out there, and everybody who was kind of part of semiconductor and a bunch of legislators went out and toured that land, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the best use for this land, we're all just looking at it right here for various reasons, was yeah, we should use that for to build a semiconductor fab and or things that connect to semiconductor fabs." And the folks that weren't on the ground, that are more concerned with, I guess, kind of that broad designation than the granular use. We're sensing a theme here, is that there's people who can see the forest and they can't see like the trees. Um, they oppose that every step of the way and made it so onerous you couldn't actually put all that land together to give Intel or any other semiconductor builder the opportunity for a fab. And now rural communities will end up paying the price for Intel either being bought by a company that doesn't care about Oregon, or Intel moving, or Intel closing. And there's going to be economic consequences for that.
Well, you're hitting on a key point, which led to the disastrous rulemaking that
Yes, yeah,
we had, which is that sometimes land use is often this philosophical debate
yeah.
about what should be allowed on farmland and what shouldn't, and what is farming and what's not. And the crux of it for us is, if a farmer wants to be farming, then they should have the freedom and the opportunity to use their property in the way that they need to earn a living farming. If a farmer doesn't want to be farming anymore and they want to go, do something else with their property, we believe that they should have the freedom and the option to do as well. And it's not much deeper for that than us, honestly. This is really a core private property rights issue. And agritourism is this really interesting space where you have a shifting economy where it's really difficult, if not impossible, to earn a living just traditionally farming anymore. The commodity prices just aren't there. And the risk of, for some commodities is so high. We see what's happening up with the cherry growers right now in Hood River. Like you cannot earn money on cherries. And so having your farm stand, having your pumpkin patch, or doing the farm to table dinner is supplemental income available to you.
So when you have rules that cap the amount that they can make from a popular pumpkin patch or other kind of activity, that's actually capping their ability to potentially keep farming. And so, yes, you may have protected the land, but if the farmer has to have their stops farming, the land goes fallow, the production and value of that land can drop or disappear. That family may sell, and it may actually turn into land that becomes something that you don't want. If you did like living next to the farm and you don't want to live next to an apartment community, right? So DLCD comes out with, I would say, draft rules that do not reflect the intent of the bill. They're not locked into the intent of the bill because the bill doesn't pass. Theoretically, they're locked into the intent of the bill if you pass it. However, I can't tell you how many times the intent of a bill has been crystal clear, and the agency has either no ability to comprehend or no regard for the intent of that bill, and shows up with rules and plans that are just not what we're looking for at all. So my
Yeah,
sense of it was that DLCD's rules were not good rules.
correct. The rules were not good rules. The
Yes.
intent of the bill was to clarify the existing statute to give farmers more opportunity. For example, we wanted to eliminate that income restriction because if farmers are struggling to stay afloat financially, why are we restricting their income? That seems like the surest way to put people out of business.
Yep.
And so the bill would have clarified things, but it would have done so in a way that gave people more opportunity. DLC did not take that approach. I sat on the rack. The rack met multiple times. Folks can watch the videos. They're all
Rules,
recorded.
that's a rules advisory committee. It's the place that I think they're required to get some input theoretically from people who don't work for the government, don't work for their agency, to give them input on what would be a good idea to make these rules, right? Which is
Correct.
it's a good thing to have.
Yeah, but they don't have to listen to the input. And
That therein lies the
oftentimes
problem.
they don't. I would say, and in this situation, our input was definitely not considered in most of the rules. I think out of the 20 or so pages of proposed draft rule concepts, we could only support one of the ideas.
Hmm.
The rest we were fundamentally opposed to. And that was because it definitely clarified the law, but the opposite way, it made there be more restrictions of what people could do with their farm stands, what events they could have, what items they could sell. And then it was extremely confusing and micromanaging. I mean, there was a proposed rule that said people were going to have to put their like chairs and picnic tables inside if the chair or the picnic table was outside more than 90 days. Like just really silly things that are not helpful to family businesses at this time who are pretty much drowning under the weight of regulation and trying to be in compliance.
I desperately want to do a records request to figure out like what in the world kind of input they got to get them to write that down. Like,
It's the same.
um,
It's the same input, Reagan, that makes them draft bills. For example, Senate Bill 78 from last session that says you can't have a house in a farm zone, which is again basically all of rural Oregon. You can't have a house larger than 2,500 square feet. If it's 2,499 square feet, that's okay. But if it's 2,500 square feet, then it's a McMansion, and we don't want large houses out in rural areas.
well,
Uh,
no one's ever heard of a farm family that's large. So, I mean, that's obviously you wouldn't.
well,
Oh, wait a minute.
yeah,
That's a lot of them are actually. It's weird that way. That's one of the silliest things out there. And I mean, it, it's one thing to regulate like to have the idea, okay, we don't want somebody to go out and build a mansion on farmland. It's another to think, well, the way we get at mansion is just square footage because you couldn't possibly need more square footage. I mean, who doesn't need more than 800 square feet to live? It's just like, I think it's the mentality is the problem. It's like there's just too narrow of a viewpoint of how people live, and that comes to these regulations where it's like, well, nobody could possibly need XYZ, and therefore we'll just outlaw it, and then we'll have solved a problem. And it's like that's not how you solve problems. But so this is the part where we get to they release the draft rules. The draft rules are amazing, and then you guys engage in a massive disinformation campaign, or so I have just recently read. I want to read a couple of lines from an email from Thousand Friends of Oregon, and I'm reading this and I'm going through it. They must have loved these rules. This looked like these rules were their firstborn child because the way they write about how you guys oppose them, well, one is intended to make you guys sound bad. But also is just like, I mean, you can hear the tears streaming into their keyboard as they're writing this. And some of my favorite. So the this wasn't about farm stands at all. It says the email, which I find interesting because the only way I heard about this rulemaking was from people who owned farm stands and the videos that they made about how these rules threaten their farm stands. So we'll set that aside. I consider, and this is, let's see, this is Sam Diaz from Thousand Friends of Oregon. Is he the executive director? Yes, he's the executive director. I consider OPOA Oregon's version of DOGE. And I don't even really know how to explain a way that that would make sense. Like the idea or the concept of DOGE was to go in and find waste, fraud, and abuse at the federal government. And sometimes they got it right, and sometimes I think there's some examples maybe they didn't. I'm totally okay to agree and disagree about those things. A select few that they say your philosophy is that a select few people should be able to do whatever they want with their land, no matter how it harms themselves or their neighbors, and taxpayers should pay for it. So one of the things I find super interesting about this is one, where taxpayers were paying for anything related to farm stands. Okay. I don't think there was any farm stand subsidy or anything like that. So I can't figure out how that is included. You shouldn't be able to harm yourself with your land. I don't know how, again, you would do that. These farmers are trying to make a living. They're trying to actually oppose and prevent their own harm by farming and doing farm stand activities. And then I guess maybe they have a different argument about how this would hurt or help their neighbors. But generally, the result that I saw from this was an outpouring of support from rural Oregonians, from suburban Oregonians, and for even from urban Oregonians who they have the urban lifestyle. They like the urban lifestyle, but they also like to venture out to the farm stand or to the picnic. I mean, that's like we're coming up on pumpkin patch season. It's just going to be prime pumpkin patch and corn maze season and stuff like that. So I guess, and I'll link this up. They're saying you misrepresented the rules or you lied about the rules. But either way, it caused the governor to pause the farm stand rules, which I think everybody but Thousand Friends thought that was a good idea to like, hey, let's take a break here. We seem to not be getting this right. Also, I can just imagine the conversations where like someone's talking to the governor about this, and you're like, so you're telling me my administration's about to shut down a bunch of super popular farm stands before I try to go run for reelection. I just imagine that conversation going absolutely nowhere. With any politician, who's going to do that? Who in their right mind is going to do that? Nobody is. So the rulemaking is on pause. They say you hijacked a public process. You said you participated in the rack, which sounds like participating in the public process. So anyway, do you guys have a response to this or just like a general response?
I don't know if I have a response necessarily because I don't think we have to give a response. I think they're, gonna say what they're gonna say, but our work speaks for itself, and we have our own. If folks haven't ever read our blog, we publish pretty much everything we think very candidly. We
Yeah.
release blog posts weekly we have posted about the rules. We've linked to the rules. We've done our own analysis on the rules. Again, we are land use lawyers, and we come at this from the perspective of people who are trying to get permits and trying to operate in the space, not trying to prevent people from doing things. And so our analysis of the rules and what this would mean for people was based on our experience. And Dave's been doing this for almost 30 years, and I've represented agriculture for my entire career. So I don't necessarily have much of a response to that, but I will say two things that have bothered me about how people are responding to the public outcry about the rules. One, the public became aware of what was going on because the farmers had the courage to speak up. And what people don't understand is that our land use system is it's what we call a complaint-based system. We don't have the land use police going out there and observing from the roads of what's going on. Our land use laws get enforced when someone files a complaint
Hmm.
about them. And we very much have a culture in Oregon of what I call, bullying by complaint and harassment by litigation. And so it's a big deal for farmers to speak up and put themselves out there on a public platform to say, this is going to affect us. This is negatively going to hurt us. We're going to, if this was passed, we would be in non-compliance. And so I just want to commend all the farmers for having the courage to speak up and make a difference, because when they did, then their customers started listening and the customers read the rules and the customers went, we don't want anything bad to happen to the pumpkin patch. We love the pumpkin patch. We didn't
Yep.
even know the pumpkin patch needed permits, let alone had
It's
to
true.
go through a spider web of regulation to even be in existence. And what has bothered me about that email and then how I've seen the state respond in the media is this idea that this is somehow a misinformation campaign or the farmers are being misled. And all I have to say is newsflash, farmers can read. They're extremely educated people. They operate in a state where they have to analyze regulation every single day to be in business.
Hmm.
And to say that they're misinformed or this is a misinformation campaign is really offensive to them. And it's a dog whistle basically for saying that people out in rural Oregon are stupid.
Yep.
And we, us certified smart people with our master's degrees in public policy, know so much better than all of them. And I really hate that. I really, really hate that. And I think it's offensive for them to be saying that. Um,
Yeah, all these dumb rich farmers. I don't, again,
yeah,
I
all these
think,
dumb rich farmers and their McMansions. I like it's
yes.
just silly.
And again, it's one of those things that we talked about with the wildfire maps. It's these things that don't actually go together. Either the farmers are smart and so they can run a successful business and they work hard, or they're dumb and lazy and they're not going to have a farm. And that's I think what's so interesting about that is for I would say groups that talk a lot about being inclusive, they aren't super inclusive actually. There's a lot of times where they're very exclusionist about certain types of people, about certain viewpoints, and I think that's pretty interesting to see here.
Well, just understand, Reagan, Thousand Friends position is that farmers are smart when they agree with Thousand Friends.
Right.
They don't agree with Thousand Friends, they're not smart, they're misinformed,
Yeah.
and they just simply don't understand. And remember on this issue, the clarion call and what really got the ball rolling on the public outcry were a series of social media posts, not from us, but directly from the farmers that we've been helping. Uh, these are sophisticated farm operations. They know what they're doing. They have to make money. And so they better know what they're doing, or else they're not going to be able to continue their farm operations. They were the ones that went out and said these rules are a problem. And they should know because the regulations are going to impact them directly. So that's where this whole thing started. And for Thousand Friends to say that they're misinformed number one, it's not true, and number two, it shows really what they think about the farmers. As Sam and I have said for years, our mission isn't to protect farmland. We're interested in protecting farmers. And so our mission is going to be to figure out whatever we can do to help the farm community and every property owner, not just farmers, but every property owner. What can we do to help them, and how can we help them succeed? That's what we try and do.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Thousand Friends so mad, because, we're actually out there representing real Oregon families and trying to help.
Well, and this was it was a total grassroots effort. I mean, they make it sound like you orchestrated some sort of presidential level campaign with spokespeople and it was like it was farmers with their iPhones. I mean, that's what I saw, as I saw farmers with their iPhones. I also think, and I'm just gonna sometimes I hate and I don't like to, because you kind of have this code where it's like, well, kind of the discussions that happen at the legislature, we orchestrate them carefully so that people can all represent their interests properly. And that sometimes, you'll say a thing to somebody and you're just like, it's not really what you mean, but you want to say it to help, you're going to build relationships and all that. The truth is that the people who shut down the public process was Thousand Friends of Oregon by killing this bill, by going to the legislature, by going to the committee members, by talking to the chair and saying this bill is bad and we will blow you up if you hear it, if you work it, if you move it. And I believe that's what happened. And so what they wanted was they wanted to have this conversation in a venue that they more tightly control, which is a state agency where they are much more influential among the Democratic Party, where they can control more of the narrative, they thought, and they tried to control the public process instead of participating in it, and it backfired. And I think that's ultimately what they are mad about. They are mad that they tried to have control and they don't have control because we still live in a representative democracy that allows lawmakers to speak, that allows lawmakers to act, that allows the governor to act. And even though they say they're okay, you can tell they're not based on the way that they wrote this. And I think that's the secret thing is they are mad that people are not listening and agreeing with them lock, stock, and barrel. And frankly, I think they need to get used to it because I think that their views, and this is just speaking for me, I want to, because I'm mad about this and very frustrated. Not that I understood the bill. I can tell you I did not understand the bill when I submitted it. I do understand it a lot better now, and I think it's important. And I get frustrated when groups like this walk in with 1970s backwards viewpoints on stuff that they think that just translates immediately to 2025, and it's just not the same. And I'm a Republican, I often get accused of having backwards views. There are so many places in Oregon where there are these groups out there that are defending laws that are 50 years old that haven't been modernized, and they like them that way and they don't ever want them to change. And really, I think that's the kind of NIMBYism that we need to reject. I can go with neighbors having their disagreements about where they want the houses built and what works for them, but have that discussion at the local level. There shouldn't be some judge in Salem or Portland making decisions about those kinds of things. And so it's this, I mean, they're a NIMBY organization, but they don't care about the people in Oregon. They care about defending the land, they care about worshiping the land, and they care about protecting the laws that they worship. And I think that that is incredibly silly, and they should, participate in the public process the way it should be and represent the views of people that there are people that do have these views, but it seems like the organization has way more extremism than among the people who actually hold the views and care about land use and the land use system. But that's my rant.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say on this is we often get accused, and there was, several blog posts or whatever saying that these videos were a part of a broader anti-land use campaign. Anti-land use. We're anti-land use. Sometimes they say we're anti-tax too, which is fun because we also operate in tax court. But the idea of being anti-land use, what we fight for is for common sense, for the laws to actually work for people, for the laws to make sense, and for the laws to have equitable outcomes for people, for families to be able to use their properties to support themselves, for people to be able to have a fair chance, for all of these things that I think are really core to our general values as the Americans and the American dream. And if doing that makes us anti the land use system, I think that says more about our land use system than it does about us.
Well, and you guys are a group that supports people using land use. Okay. And that's the actual words of the system. And the thing that people don't understand, I think, always is that even as sophisticated as a lot of these farmers are, they're still small family owned operations. The big corporate farmers will survive all of these regulations. They care very little and often have enough levers to pull to get whatever they need to survive. They have big legal teams. They have lots more options. These farmers have the land that their family has owned and farmed for generations, and that is it. And as soon as they lose that, they're done. And there's no comeback tour for them. There's no other opportunity. There's no getting, bought and repackaged like a lot of these corporate folks do. There's no other state, other country to farm in. There's just their land. And so there's the people who defend the little guys and the people that get used by the big guys. And I think a lot of times, some of these organizations are actually getting used by the sort of big corporate folks they claim to despise, which I think is also interesting.
We have, so we work primarily on land use, but we also have been working, especially in the last year, and will continue to be expanding more into other areas of natural resource law and agricultural law. But what folks, no matter, what team you're on, what everyone needs to understand is we are creating a regulatory system in this state where small businesses cannot survive. The big corporate ag that most people in Portland say they do not like, you are creating an environment where only businesses that have in-house legal counsel, in-house scientists, in-house consulting, or massive budgets to pay for all of those people can operate in compliance in this state.
And most importantly, ten lobbyists
And
to,
10 lobbyists, correct, on speed dial.
yep.
So that is the trend that we are creating in Oregon, especially for agriculture. We are making it so that small family-run businesses cannot survive here. And so if folks don't like that, if folks want there to be more property owners, if folks want there to be more family-run farms, they really need to start reflecting of what policies and what regulations we're promoting and what we're not.
Really appreciate you guys coming on today. I think that this has given people hopefully a lot to learn, a lot to read about, a lot to think about. I'll make sure I link your guys' website in the show notes. Any closing thoughts for our listeners?
Oh, just remember, we get calls all the time from property owners across the state. If folks have questions, feel free to reach out to us. They can do it that by phone, or they can email us. All the information that you need is on our website, OregonPropertyOwners.org.
Awesome. And also, I think follow you on Twitter now and respond to you on Twitter. Do you guys have your Twitter handle in front of you? I don't know that I do actually.
I think it's OPOA official. Hold on.
OPOA_official. Yes.
Yes.
So follow them. There's lots of great tweets from them on a lot of these issues. And then also, if you're interested and you're very passionate about making a difference, you guys have a job opening too. So take a look at that.
Yeah, we're hiring. We are expanding. Who knew, Reagan, that there would be so many people that need so much help trying to navigate their way through the Byzantine maze of Oregon's land use system?
Who knew? Appreciate Sam and Dave for you guys being here. We'll have you back. Just, we'll reach out or you guys reach out if you've got something big to talk about. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you.
Thanks, Reagan.